Dawn crawled over the far ridge like a tired traveler, its pale gold light dragging across the abandoned train tracks that cut through sagebrush crossing like an old scar. The morning air held the brittle stillness of a world holding its breath, cold enough that even the dust seemed unwilling to rise. Out in that hush stood Mara Ellsworth, her silhouette thin as a prayer forgotten in the corner of a church. Her coat was threadbare. Her satchel hung like a wounded limb. And her hope, well, it was little more than a candle whose flame had begun to tremble. She had only the clothes on her back, a few coins, and a small book of poems she had kept since childhood, pages swollen from weather and tears. Behind her, the train that had carried her from her old life shrieked one last lonely whistle before crawling away, abandoning her to a town she'd never meant to end up in. A soft wind pushed across the tracks, lifting a few strands of her hair as if the morning wanted to inspect this newcomer, this woman who had arrived with the kind of eyes that carried storms. A quiet history of heartbreak. She had not planned to flee her old post as a teacher. She had loved her students, loved the chalk dust that coated her fingers, loved the way young minds lit up like lanterns. But affection is a fragile thing when placed in the wrong man's hands. The school trustee, wealthy, well-fed, used to getting what he wanted, had cornered her one evening after class. She had pulled her wrist free. Firm, polite, unmoving. The next day, he whispered lies into the ear of Miss Abigail Royce, the town's chief needle of gossip. Within a week, Mara was painted as a woman of loose principles, a dangerous influence on children. The last parent who walked away from her classroom didn't even meet her eyes. By the time she packed her few belongings, her reputation had already been buried under other people's words. Sagebrush Crossing was supposed to be a stop on the way to somewhere else. But the conductor had warned her of a broken rail farther east. She'd been forced off. Fate, it seemed, had chosen this hardscrabble place for her. Dust, stairs, and closed doors. The small settlement stretched in a cluster of creaking wooden buildings and tired corrals. A saloon with a sliding sign. A church whose bell rope hung frayed. A general store that carried everything except grace. Mara stepped inside that store, hoping for directions, maybe work. The air smelled of old leather and dried beans. A clerk with a tobacco-stained mustache eyed her up and down as though she carried trouble in her pockets. "No openings for teachers," he grunted before she could even ask. "Town's too small. Ain't got funds. And the rooms at the boarding house filled last night. Bad time to be new." He slid a small piece of jerky across the counter but kept his hand on it, making her reach. She paid anyway. Her pride was battered, but not dead. Outside, two ranch wives whispered behind gloved hands. Mara didn't hear the words, but she recognized the tone. A tone she'd grown too familiar with. In places like this, rumors traveled faster than truth ever could. A cowboy with grief in his shoulders. A cloud of dust rose at the far end of the street. A horse trotted in, steady and patient, carrying a man whose posture bent under invisible weight. Elias Crowder. Even if she hadn't known his name, Mara would have known his kind, men shaped by weather and loss, whose silence spoke more honestly than their words ever could. His coat was sunburnt. His hat was pulled low. And grief clung to him like an old friend who refused to leave. Beside him walked two boys. Jonah, taller, watchful, his gaze sharp with the caution of a child forced to grow too fast. Finn, younger, wild-haired, full of a timid curiosity untouched by sorrow. The boys were arguing over something. Mara couldn't hear what, but Finn's apple slipped from his hand, rolling to her feet. She picked it up and knelt. "You can have it back," she said softly. Finn smiled, that wide, shameless smile only 7-year-olds can manage. Jonah's eyes narrowed, measuring her like a stranger arriving at the gates of his small, private world. Elias said nothing, only gave a small nod of thanks. But it was enough to tell Mara he was the kind of man who noticed kindness even when he didn't know what to do with it. The edges of desperation. As the sun dipped behind the distant bluffs, the temperature fell with it. The sky bruised into violet, and lanterns began to flicker to life across the street. Mara made her way to the boarding house, praying for a miracle. But the landlady, round as a kettle, stern as winter, shook her head hard enough to jostle her curls. "Full up. Try the livery. They sometimes take in travelers." The pause before travelers was knife-sharp. By the time Mara reached the livery stable, her legs felt like wet rope. The stable boy shrugged. "Ain't got beds. But there's hay." She thanked him anyway. Nights like this have a way of stripping you down to bone, leaving only dignity to wrap around yourself like a thin blanket. She sat on a crate behind the stable, clutching her satchel, trying to keep from shivering. Tears slipped out, quiet, almost embarrassed. She caught them on the back of her hand. It wasn't the cold that broke her. It was the feeling of being unclaimed by the world. Morning arrived shyly, its light slipping past the barn slats like it was afraid to wake the world too quickly. Mara sat up from the hay, brushing straw from her sleeves. Her bones ached from the cold night, but her spirit, that was the part that felt most brittle. She was gathering her satchel when she sensed someone nearby. A shadow darkened the doorway. Elias Crowder stood there, balancing a small tin plate in his rough hands. He said nothing at first, only looked at her with that slow, steady gaze of a man who'd known too much quiet pain to be anything but gentle with another's. "I figured you might be hungry," he murmured. On the plate lay a warm biscuit wrapped in a soft piece of cloth. A small kindness. A simple thing. But simple things have saved people before. Mara's fingers trembled as she took it. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thin as the morning fog. Elias didn't ask about her night. He didn't offer pity, only presence. And sometimes presence is the only mercy a person needs. The boys become bridges of light. Later that day, Mara walked toward the hitching posts behind the general store, hoping for day work. Most folks turned away at the sight of her traveling clothes and weary eyes. But Finn spotted her first. "Miss Mara," he chirped, running at her with reckless joy. "Did you sleep in the barn? Pa says I can sleep in the barn sometimes, but Jonah says that's unsanitary." Jonah followed behind, calmer, sharper, his eyes darting between Mara and the townsfolk watching them. Mara knelt to Finn's level, trying not to feel the burn of judgment circling like vultures. Finn noticed the worn book sticking out of her satchel. "What's that?" he asked. "A book of poems," she answered. "Would you like to hear one?" Finn nodded so fast his hair flew. Jonah stepped closer, though he didn't say a word. She read softly, her voice weaving through the cold air like smoke from a chimney. The boys listened, Finn with wonder, Jonah with quiet hunger. Elias stood at a distance, arms folded as he mended a wagon wheel. He didn't interrupt, didn't intrude. But there was a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a father seeing his children warmed by something he could not give. For the first time in a long while, Mara felt useful. Not wanted, she didn't dare hope that far, but needed in some small, fragile way. Rumors are sharp, and they cut quiet hearts first. By midday, Mara ventured into town again, hoping to find any scrap of honest work, laundry, mending, even cleaning stalls. But whispers followed her through every doorway. Whispers shaped like judgment. "That's the teacher from Coal Bend, the one who. I heard she was asked to leave for improper conduct. She's awfully friendly with Crowder's boys, isn't she?" Each murmur chipped away at her spirit. On the wooden walkway by the dress shop, Miss Abigail Royce appeared like bad weather, sharp posture, sharper tongue. "You're still here?" she asked coolly, eyes narrowed. "Some women don't know when they've worn out their welcome." Mara stiffened. "I mean no trouble. Trouble doesn't always announce itself, dear." Abigail leaned in, voice lowering to a poisonous whisper. "A woman with your history shouldn't linger near a widower, or his sons." Jonah heard every word. His fists curled. But Mara simply lifted her chin, wounded but dignified. And for the first time, Jonah realized courage could be quiet. Nightfall, and an offer heavy with truth. Elias found her that evening sitting on the steps behind the livery again, her satchel propped beside her as if she were ready to vanish in the next gust of wind. "Mara," he said, voice softer than dusk, "you been looking for work all day?" She nodded. "You find any?" She shook her head. He lowered himself beside her, elbows on his knees. "You got someone waiting for you? A home somewhere?" "No," her voice cracked like a branch in winter. "Just myself." He let the truth settle between them, heavy but honest. Finally, Elias exhaled slowly, as if bracing for something he wasn't sure he had a right to say. "My boys," he began, staring out across the street. "They been drifting since their ma passed. I'm doing what I can, but it ain't enough. They need—" His voice faltered. He swallowed hard. "They need someone gentle. Someone steady. Someone like you." Mara froze. Her heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. Elias kept his gaze on the ground. "And you need shelter. A place to belong. Maybe even a fresh start." The lantern beside them crackled. Footsteps passed somewhere in the dark. But here, in the circle of dim gold light, it felt like the rest of the world had been pushed aside. "I ain't talkin' about romance," Elias added quickly, "or promises neither of us can hold. I'm speakin' plain. Straight. I can offer you a roof, warm meals, respect, and in return, help with the boys. Teachin'. Kindness. A woman's presence." His voice broke, just a little. "Maybe you'd take care of them better than I've been able to." Mara felt her breath hitch. It was not a proposal. Not truly. But it was something dangerously close to salvation. "Elias," she whispered, her fingers twisting in her skirt. "I don't want to be a burden." "You ain't," he said simply. "You're an answer I didn't expect." That was what undid her. A tear slipped from her lashes. She wiped it away before it could fall onto her lap. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. But she nodded, small, trembling, afraid, hopeful. A fragile agreement, shaped more by need than certainty, yet held together by a quiet grace neither of them fully understood. Behind them, Jonah and Finn peeked around the corner, eyes wide, hearts brightening like lanterns newly lit. And though none of them realized it yet, that small nod under a fading moon would be the spark that changed all four lives forever. The Crowder Ranch sat at the edge of the world, or at least it felt that way to Mara during her first days there. A weathered house, a leaning barn, and rolling fields that carried the scent of sage and the half-remembered music of wind. The place bore the fingerprints of grief, quiet corners, uneven silences, and the strange heaviness of a home missing its heart. But it also held possibility, like a violin waiting for someone brave enough to draw the bow. Mara woke before dawn each morning, stepping into a life that wasn't yet hers but fit her more gently than anything she'd known in months. She stitched curtains the wind had torn, scrubbed plates that had forgotten shine, and taught the boys lessons on the porch while the sun climbed its slow arc above the valley. And slowly, carefully, the ranch began to breathe again. A quiet blossoming. It wasn't grand gestures that changed things. It was Finn's laughter, returning first as a broken whistle, then a full, shameless giggle. It was Jonah's shoulders lowering, the hard lines softening as he found comfort in the rhythm of Mara's voice when she read poetry aloud in the evenings. It was Elias watching all of it from the doorway, his thumb brushing the inside of his hat brim, his eyes tired but softened by wonder he didn't dare speak aloud. And Mara herself was changing without noticing. Her spine straightened. Her steps grew surer. Her voice held warmth instead of apology. After months of drifting like wind-blown ash, she was settling, rooting, even. But every story that finds a gentle beginning must first confront the shadow that tries to pull it back. The storm of judgment arrives. News travels quickly in small towns. Good news limps, but bad news gallops. One cold afternoon, Mara and the boys were gathering firewood when a wagon rattled up the Crowder driveway. Dust billowed, revealing Miss Abigail Royce perched on the seat like a vulture wearing Sunday gloves. Her expression was tight, disapproving, already carved from stone. "Mara Ellsworth," she called sharply, ignoring the boy's presence. "You are coming with me." Mara stiffened. "I don't understand." "It's come to my attention," Abigail said loudly, "that you've been living here with this widower. Without marriage. Without propriety. And without the town's consent." Jonah stepped forward, fury burning in his young eyes. "You don't get to talk about her like that." Abigail sniffed. A boy defending a woman of questionable character. How fitting. Elias emerged from the barn before Jonah could lunge. "Miss Royce," he said, voice even but edged with steel, "you've said enough." "Oh, I haven't begun," she snapped. "I've spoken with the sheriff. You're harboring a woman wanted for investigation in Coal Bend." Mara felt the blood leave her face. "That is not true," she whispered. "They dismissed me on rumors. Nothing more." Abigail's lips curved, pleased to have struck the deepest wound. "In this town, reputation carries more weight than truth. And yours has collapsed." Tears pricked the corner of Mara's eyes, unbidden, humiliating. Elias stepped in front of her, solid, immovable, anger thrumming in the air like the charge before lightning. "You come onto my land, insult a guest under my roof, and try to drag her off like she's some stray? Not today. Not ever." Abigail faltered. Elias Crowder was a quiet man, but even quiet men have their breaking point. He lifted his chin. "Mara stays. She's needed here." "You have no right," Abigail hissed. Elias's voice dropped into something low and sacred. "I must skin her to marry me." The world went still, wind, dust, even sound freezing as if daring anyone to move first. Mara's breath caught. Jonah's eyes widened. Finn whispered, "Pa." Abigail's expression shattered into disbelief. "You can't. You don't even." "I do," Elias said simply. "I ain't proposing out of pressure or shame. I'm proposing because this woman brought my home back to life. Because my boys sleep easier with her near. Because we need her. And because He inhaled shakily. "Because I'd like her to choose us. If she wants." Then he turned to Mara. No crowd. No ceremony. Just one man offering a lifeline with the gentleness of someone who knew what it meant to be broken and still hope. "Mara," he murmured, "you tell me to stop, I'll never speak of it again. But if you want a home, if you want a family, you got one right here." Her trembling hands rose to her mouth. Not from obligation. Not from desperation. But from something blooming so quietly inside her that she hadn't recognized it until now. She looked at the boys, Jonah anxious but hopeful, Finn gripping her skirt like a child afraid she might slip away. Then she looked at Elias. A man carved by loss, softened by kindness, standing before her with a heart brave enough to offer life a second try. Mara stepped closer. Her voice came out small, but steady. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Elias Crowder. I'll stay. I'll marry you." Jonah let out the breath he'd been holding. Finn whooped, leaping into the air. Elias closed his eyes, relief flooding his expression with a warmth she'd never seen. Abigail Royce sputtered, lost for words, a rare and blessed miracle, before turning her horse around and storming off, her judgment trailing behind her like torn fabric. But judgment no longer had a home here. Hope did. A house rekindled. The wedding was simple, a porch ceremony under lantern light, the boys flanking them, the wind threading through the tall grass like a hymn. No grandeur. No choir. Just four souls promising to choose each other every morning the sun rose. Mara's heart, once emptied by shame, felt impossibly full. Elias held her hand with a reverence that made her knees weak. And for the first time since she'd boarded that train months ago, she felt claimed, not as a possession, but as someone cherished. A woman no longer drifting. A woman finally home. A final reflection. For you, the listener. If you've walked through life feeling judged, unwanted, or misunderstood, let this quiet story settle in your bones. Some storms are meant to strip away the places where you never belonged, so you can finally see the doorway built for you. Sometimes hope doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as a tired cowboy offering a biscuit at dawn. Or a small child smiling up at you. Or a single brave yes, whispered beneath a quiet sky. And sometimes, friend, the life you deserve is waiting just beyond the edge of your fear. Standing tall, steady, and already reaching for you.